The wheel snapped with a crack that echoed through the howling wind, and Katherine Palmer knew with absolute certainty she was going to die tonight in the frozen darkness of the Kansas prairie. The wagon lurched violently to one side, throwing her hard against the wooden seat as her horse whinnied in panic. Snow drove sideways through the black night, each flake feeling like a tiny blade against her exposed skin. Catherine fought to control the terrified animal, her fingers already numb inside her thin gloves as she pulled on the reins. The February blizzard of 1882 had come out of nowhere, transforming what should have been a simple journey back to Newton into a nightmare. She had stayed too late at the Morrison farm, helping Mrs. Morrison with a difficult birth. The baby had finally arrived just after sunset, healthy and squalling, and Catherine had been so relieved she had not noticed the temperature dropping or the clouds gathering on the horizon. By the time she left, the first flakes were already falling. She had thought she could make it back to town before the storm truly hit. She had been catastrophically wrong. Now the wagon tilted at a dangerous angle, the broken wheel making it impossible to continue. Catherine climbed down carefully, her boots sinking into snow that was already ankle-deep and rising fast. The wind tore at her coat and sent her dark hair whipping around her face. She could barely see 3 feet in front of her. The road, if it could even be called that anymore, had disappeared beneath the white blanket. She had no idea which direction Newton lay or how far she had come. Her medical bag sat in the wagon bed, along with a few supplies and a single blanket. Catherine grabbed both the bag and the blanket, knowing they might be the only things standing between her and freezing to death. She tried to unhitch the horse, but her fingers would not cooperate. The leather straps and buckles might as well have been made of iron for all the success she had. After several agonizing minutes, she gave up. The horse would have to stay with the wagon. She could not stay here. The wind would cut right through her, and there was no shelter. She needed to find something, anything, that would block the elements. Catherine wrapped the blanket around her shoulders and started walking, keeping the wind at her back because facing it was impossible. Each step was an effort. Snow worked its way into her boots. Her toes were already losing feeling. Time became meaningless. She might have been walking for 10 minutes or an hour. Her teeth chattered so hard she bit her tongue and tasted blood. The cold seeped deeper, past her skin and into her bones. Her thoughts started to scatter and drift like the snow around her. She stumbled and fell, the frozen ground hard as stone beneath the snow. Getting back up took every ounce of willpower she possessed. Catherine knew the signs of hypothermia. She had treated it before, had seen what happened when people stayed out in the cold too long, the confusion, the drowsiness, the overwhelming urge to just lie down and rest. She was experiencing all of it now. Her body was shutting down, trying to preserve her core. She would not last much longer. She fell again, and this time she could not get up. Her legs would not obey her anymore. The snow felt almost soft now, almost welcoming. Catherine closed her eyes. She thought of her parents, both dead from cholera 3 years ago. She thought of the patients she would never treat, the life she would never live. She was 22 years old, and this was how it ended, alone in a snowstorm in the middle of nowhere. Then she heard something, a voice, distant and distorted by the wind. Catherine tried to call out, but her throat was too frozen. She tried to move, but her body had given up. The voice came again, closer now, and then there was a light, warm and golden, through her closed eyelids. "Jesus Christ," a man's voice said, rough with shock. "Madam? Madam, can you hear me?" Strong hands touched her shoulder, her face. Catherine managed to open her eyes just enough to see a shape looming over her, backlit by a lantern that seemed impossibly bright. A face, all hard angles and concern, appeared in her limited field of vision. Dark eyes, a mustache dusted with snow, a wide-brimmed hat. "I've got you," the man said. "Stay with me now." Catherine felt herself being lifted, gathered up against a broad chest that radiated warmth. She wanted to tell him about the wagon, about the horse, but her mouth would not form words. The world swayed and moved around her as he carried her through the storm. She caught glimpses of his face as he looked down at her, his jaw set with determination. The lantern swung from somewhere, casting wild shadows. She must have lost consciousness because the next thing she knew, they were out of the wind. She heard a door slam shut, cutting off the howl of the storm. Warmth hit her like a physical thing, making her skin prickle and burn. She groaned, and the sound that came out was pitiful even to her own ears. "Easy now," the man said. He set her down on something soft, a bed maybe, and Katherine felt him unwrapping the frozen blanket from around her shoulders. "Your fingers and toes, can you feel them?" Katherine tried to answer, but her teeth were chattering too violently. The man cursed under his breath and moved away. She heard him moving around, the crackle of a fire, the clink of metal. When he returned, he was pulling off her boots with careful efficiency. "This is going to hurt," he warned, "but we need to warm you up slowly." He was right. As sensation started to return to her extremities, it felt like thousands of needles stabbing into her flesh. Katherine cried out, unable to stop herself. The man kept talking to her in a low, steady voice, telling her that was good, that pain meant the blood was flowing again, that she was going to be all right. He wrapped her feet in what felt like warm towels and then moved to her hands, removing her gloves and doing the same. Katherine finally managed to focus on him properly. He was younger than she had first thought, perhaps 26 or 27, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and those striking dark eyes. He wore a simple work shirt and suspenders, and there was a gentleness to his movements that contrasted with his rough exterior. "Where am I?" Katherine managed to ask, her voice barely a whisper. "My ranch about 5 miles north of Newton," he said, wrapping another blanket around her shoulders. "I was checking on the barn when I thought I heard something. Nearly convinced myself I was imagining things, but something told me to take a look. Found you about 100 yards from my property line." "My wagon," Katherine said. "The wheel broke." "I will look for it once the storm passes," he said. "Right now, you need to focus on getting warm." He stood and moved to the fireplace, stoking the flames higher. The cabin, Katherine could see now, was small but sturdy. One room with a bed, a table, a couple of chairs, and a small kitchen area. Everything was neat and orderly. "What's your name?" he asked, filling a kettle with water and setting it on the stove. "Katherine Palmer," she said. "I'm a midwife. I was coming back from the Morrison farm." "Katherine Palmer," he repeated, as if testing the name. "I'm Matthew Reeves. I run cattle on this land." He glanced back at her. "A midwife, that explains the medical bag. Brave of you to be out on a night like this." "Foolish, more like," Katherine said. A violent shiver ran through her, and Matthew was back at her side immediately. "The shivering is good," he said. "Means your body is trying to warm itself up. Are you feeling anything in your fingers and toes now?" "Yes," Katherine said. "It hurts." "Good. That's good." He checked the towels around her feet and then her hands, his touch professional and careful. "No frostbite that I can see, but we need to keep warming you up gradually. I am going to make you some tea. Get some warm liquid in you." Katherine watched as he moved around the small cabin with easy familiarity. He was tall, she realized, probably over 6 feet, with the build of someone who worked hard physically every day. His hands were large and calloused, but they had been so gentle with her. She found herself wondering if he lived out here alone, and then immediately felt foolish for caring. He brought her a cup of tea, helping her hold it because her hands were still shaking. The warmth spreading down her throat and into her stomach felt like salvation. Katherine took small sips, letting the heat work its way through her system. "Thank you," she said, meeting his eyes. "You saved my life." Matthew's expression shifted, something almost uncomfortable passing across his features. "Anyone would have done the same." "But you're the one who did it," Katherine said. "If you had not found me, I would be dead right now." He did not argue with that. Instead, he pulled one of the chairs closer to the bed and sat down. "Tell me if you start feeling too warm or if anything feels wrong. Hypothermia is tricky." I know, Katherine said. I have treated it before. She managed a weak smile, just never experienced it myself. First time for everything, Matthew said, a hint of dry humor in his voice. Though I would have preferred to meet you under better circumstances. So would I, Katherine admitted. She took another sip of tea. How long have you been out here? About 4 years now, Matthew said. Saved up enough to buy this land and some cattle. It is not much, but it's mine. There was pride in his voice, the kind that came from building something with your own hands. Katherine understood that. She had worked hard to become a midwife, studying under old Dr. Harrison and Newton until she knew enough to practice on her own. It had not been easy, especially after her parents died and she had to support herself. Do you live alone? The question was out before she could stop it, and Katherine felt her cold, numbed cheeks try to flush. If Matthew found the question odd, he did not show it. Just me and the cattle. Gets lonely sometimes, but I knew what I was signing up for. He stood and checked the fire again. You should try to get some more rest. Your body needs it. Katherine wanted to protest, but exhaustion was pulling at her like a weight. The warmth of the cabin, the softness of the bed, the aftermath of her ordeal, it all combined to make her eyelids impossibly heavy. She set the empty teacup aside and let herself sink back into the pillows. Thank you, she murmured again. Matthew? She did not see the way his expression softened at the sound of his name on her lips, or the way he watched her for a long moment before turning back to the fire. When Katherine woke, pale gray light was filtering through the cabin's single window. The storm was still raging outside, but it sounded less violent than it had the night before. She was warm now, almost too warm, bundled in multiple blankets. Her body ached in places she had not known could ache, and her head felt fuzzy, but she was alive. Matthew was asleep in one of the chairs by the fire, his head tilted back at an angle that was going to give him a terrible crick in his neck. He had given her the bed, Katherine realized. He had spent the entire night in that uncomfortable chair, keeping watch over her and the fire. She sat up slowly, testing her limbs. Everything worked, though her fingers and toes still tingled. Her medical bag sat on the table, and she noticed her coat hanging by the fire to dry. Matthew must have retrieved it from where it had fallen. As if sensing her movement, Matthew stirred and opened his eyes. For a moment, he looked disoriented, and then his gaze found her and he sat up straight. You are awake, he said, his voice rough with sleep. How are you feeling? Sore, Katherine admitted, but much better. Thank you for letting me have the bed. Matthew waved that off as he stood and stretched, his joints popping. Could not very well let you sleep in a chair after nearly freezing to death. He moved to the window and looked out. Storm is still going, but it should blow itself out by this afternoon. I will go look for your wagon then. I can help, Katherine said, starting to push the blankets aside. No, Matthew said firmly. You need to rest. You went through a serious trauma last night, Miss Palmer. Your body needs time to recover. It is Katherine, she said, and I am a midwife, Mr. Reeves. I know what my body needs. Matthew, he said, a hint of a smile playing at his lips. And I am sure you do, but I also know stubborn when I see it. At least eat something before you try to convince me you are well enough to go tramping through a blizzard. Katherine's stomach chose that moment to growl loudly, undermining any argument she might have made. Matthew's smile widened into something genuine and warm, transforming his serious face into something almost handsome. I will take that as agreement, he said, moving to the kitchen area. I have got eggs, bacon, and bread. Nothing fancy, but it is filling. That sounds wonderful, Katherine said honestly. She watched as he efficiently prepared breakfast, cracking eggs into a pan and slicing bacon with practiced ease. You are a good cook. Living alone, you learn quick or you starve, Matthew said. Though I will admit my repertoire is limited. I can make about 5 things and I rotate through them. 5 things is 4 more than many men I have met, Catherine said, thinking of some of the bachelor homesteaders she had treated over the years. Some of them seemed to survive entirely on beans and hardtack. Matthew brought her a plate piled with food and a fork, and Catherine ate with an appetite she had not felt in months. Everything tasted incredible, though that might have been the lingering effects of her near-death experience. Food always tasted better when you were alive to eat it. They ate in companionable silence for a while, the sound of the wind outside a constant backdrop. Catherine found herself studying Matthew when she thought he was not looking, noticing little details. The way his hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck, the small scar above his left eyebrow, the calluses on his hands from years of hard work. He was handsome in a rough, unpolished way, the kind of man who belonged out here on the frontier. "What made you become a midwife?" Matthew asked, breaking the silence. Catherine considered the question. "My mother was one," she said. "I grew up watching her help women bring life into the world, and it always seemed like the most important thing a person could do. When she died, I wanted to continue her work. Dr. Harrison and Newton taught me what he could about medicine in general, but midwifery is my calling." "Your parents, they both passed?" Matthew asked gently. "Cholera 3 years ago," Catherine said. "They died within days of each other." The old pain flared briefly, but it had dulled with time. "What about your family?" Matthew's expression shuddered slightly. "My parents have a farm back in Missouri. I have got 2 brothers and a sister, all back east. I am the one who wanted to strike out on my own, make my own way." "Do you regret it?" Catherine asked. "No," Matthew said without hesitation. "This life is hard, but it's honest work. I answer to no one but myself, and what I build here will be mine." He paused. "Though I would not mind having someone to share it with eventually." There was something in the way he said it, a note of loneliness that resonated with Catherine. She knew that feeling well. Newton was a small town, and while she had friends and neighbors, there was no one special, no one who made her heart beat faster or her thoughts drift during quiet moments. She had resigned herself to the possibility that she might always be alone, too focused on her work to find love. "I am sure you will," Catherine said softly. "Find someone, I mean." Matthew's dark eyes met hers, and for a moment, something passed between them. An awareness, a recognition. Then he looked away, clearing his throat. "Storm is definitely letting up," he said, moving back to the window. "Give it another hour or so, and I will go look for your wagon." Catherine stood, testing her legs. They held her weight without issue. "I am coming with you." "Catherine," Matthew started, but she held up a hand. "My wagon, my responsibility," she said firmly. "Besides, I am feeling much better. A walk in the cold air might actually do me good." Matthew looked like he wanted to argue, but something in her expression must have convinced him it would be futile. "Fine," he said. "But you are wearing extra layers, and if you start feeling cold or weak, you tell me immediately." "Agreed," Catherine said. True to Matthew's prediction, the storm began to taper off about an hour later. By early afternoon, it had reduced to light flurries, and the wind had died down to a manageable level. Matthew bundled Catherine into one of his spare coats, which was far too large for her, but much warmer than her own, and wrapped a thick scarf around her neck and face. They stepped out into a world transformed. Snow lay thick over everything, pristine and white, broken only by the path Matthew had cleared from the cabin to the barn earlier. The sky was still gray, but lighter now, with hints of blue peeking through the clouds. "Stay close," Matthew said, leading the way. "I have got a rough idea of where you must have been when you went down." They walked in silence, Catherine following in Matthew's footsteps to make the going easier. The cold was sharp but bearable now, nothing like the deadly wind of the night before. She found herself watching Matthew's broad back, the easy confidence with which he navigated the snow-covered prairie. He had tied a rope around his waist and given her the other end, just in case they got separated. After about 20 minutes of walking, Matthew pointed ahead. There! Catherine's wagon sat tilted in the snow, the broken wheel obvious even from a distance. Her horse was still hitched to it, standing with its head down. Relief flooded through her at seeing the animal alive. Easy girl, Matthew said, approaching the horse slowly. The animal raised its head and whickered, clearly distressed but unharmed. Matthew checked it over with practiced hands. She is cold and hungry, but she will be all right. Good sturdy mare you have got here. Her name is Daisy, Katherine said, running her hand along the horse's neck. She was my father's. We will get her back to my barn, get her fed and warmed up, Matthew said. He examined the wagon, frowning at the broken wheel. This is not a quick fix. I can get your things out of the wagon bed, but we will have to come back for the wagon itself once I can repair the wheel. That is fine, Katherine said. I am just grateful you found me before it was too late. Matthew met her eyes over the horse's back. So am I, he said quietly. They loaded Catherine's medical bag and supplies onto Daisy, and Matthew unhitched her from the wagon. He led the mare, and Katherine walked beside him, the rope between them unnecessary now, but neither of them moved to untie it. The walk back to the ranch felt shorter, perhaps because Katherine was not half frozen this time. Matthew settled Daisy in the barn with his own horse and 2 mules, giving her grain and fresh water. The barn was surprisingly well built, sturdy and warm, with several stalls and a hayloft above. You have got a nice setup here, Katherine observed, looking around. Thank you, Matthew said, clearly pleased. Built most of it myself. The cattle are in the far pasture, sheltered by the tree line. They should have weathered the storm all right, but I will need to check on them tomorrow. They returned to the cabin, and Katherine found herself oddly reluctant to leave the comfortable warmth they had established. But she had responsibilities, patients who might need her. I should get back to Newton, she said. People will be worried. Not today, Matthew said firmly. It is already late afternoon, and I am not letting you travel alone. Tomorrow morning, I will take you back on my horse. Tonight you rest. Katherine wanted to argue, but the truth was she was tired, and the thought of trying to ride all the way to Newton right now was daunting. All right, she agreed, but I am not taking your bed again. We can share, or I can sleep in the chair. Matthew's ears turned slightly red. I am not letting you sleep in a chair. Then we share, Katherine said, her tone brooking no argument. It is practical, and we are both adults. Besides, after last night, I think we are past standing on ceremony. Matthew looked torn, clearly wrestling with propriety and practicality. Finally, he nodded. All right, but I will sleep on top of the covers. They spent the rest of the afternoon in easy conversation. Matthew told her about ranching, about the challenges of keeping cattle alive through harsh winters and dry summers, about his hopes of expanding his herd. Katherine told him about some of her more memorable births, leaving out names and details for privacy, but sharing the joy and occasional terror of her profession. As evening fell, Matthew made dinner, a simple stew that was hearty and warming. They ate by lamplight, the cabin feeling cozy and intimate. Katherine could not remember the last time she had felt this comfortable with someone, this natural ease of companionship. When it came time for bed, Katherine changed into one of Matthew's shirts while he stepped outside to check the animals one more time. The shirt hung to her knees and smelled like wood smoke and something uniquely him. She climbed under the covers, suddenly nervous. Matthew returned, his face and hair dusted with snow. He banked the fire, and then, with obvious reluctance, lay down on top of the covers beside her, as far to the edge of the bed as he could manage. Good night, Katherine, he said softly. Good night, Matthew, she replied. Katherine closed her eyes, acutely aware of his presence beside her. She could feel the warmth of him through the blankets, hear his breathing in the quiet of the cabin. She expected to lie awake for hours, but exhaustion pulled her under quickly. Sometime in the night, she woke to find herself curled against Matthew's side, and his arm had come around her, holding her close even through the layers of blankets. She knew she should move away, should maintain propriety, but he was warm and solid and safe. Katherine closed her eyes and let herself drift back to sleep. When morning came, Katherine woke to find herself alone in the bed. Matthew was at the stove, making coffee, and he glanced over when he heard her stirring. "Morning," he said. "Coffee is almost ready." "Morning," Katherine replied, sitting up. If he remembered holding her in the night, he gave no indication of it. She felt strangely disappointed. They had a quick breakfast, and then Matthew saddled his horse, a big bay gelding named Duke. He helped Katherine up into the saddle and then swung up behind her, his arms coming around her to take the reins. Katherine tried to ignore the way her heart sped up at the contact, the solid strength of his chest against her back. The ride to Newton took about an hour through the snow-covered prairie. As they crested the final rise and the town came into view, Katherine felt an unexpected reluctance to arrive. These past hours with Matthew had been some of the most peaceful she had experienced in years, and she did not want them to end. Newton was a bustling frontier town, though the snow had kept most people indoors. Matthew guided Duke down Main Street, and Katherine could see curtains twitching as curious eyes watched them pass. She could only imagine what people would think, seeing her riding with a strange man, wearing his too large coat. "Where do you live?" Matthew asked. "The house on the corner of 4th and Oak," Katherine said. "The one with the blue door." Matthew guided Duke to the small house, helping Katherine down. She handed him his coat reluctantly, feeling the cold immediately without it. "Thank you," she said, looking up at him, "for everything. You saved my life, and you have been nothing but kind." Matthew's expression was unreadable. "It was no trouble," he said. "I am glad I found you." Katherine wanted to say more, wanted to ask when she might see him again, but the words stuck in her throat. This was just a chance encounter, an accident of fate. Matthew would go back to his ranch, and she would return to her work, and that would be that. "Take care of yourself, Katherine Palmer," Matthew said, touching the brim of his hat. "You too, Matthew Reeves," Katherine replied. She watched as he rode away, Duke's hoofprints leaving a trail in the snow. When he disappeared around the corner, Katherine finally turned and went inside her cold, empty house. The next few days passed in a blur. Katherine's patience kept her busy, and everyone wanted to hear about her ordeal in the snowstorm. She told the story, leaving out the more personal details, focusing on Matthew's rescue and kindness. She assured everyone she was fine, that there was no lasting damage. But at night, alone in her bed, Katherine found herself thinking about Matthew, about his dark eyes and gentle hands, his quiet strength and dry humor, about the way she had felt safe in his arms, even through layers of blankets. She told herself it was foolish, that she barely knew him, but the feelings would not go away. A week after the storm, a knock came at her door in the late afternoon. Katherine opened it to find Matthew standing on her porch, hat in his hands, looking nervous. "Matthew," she said, surprised and pleased in equal measure. "What are you doing here?" "I fixed your wagon wheel," he said. "Brought your wagon back. It is at the livery stable." "Oh," Katherine said, trying to hide her disappointment. Of course that was why he had come. "Thank you. How much do I owe you for the repairs?" Matthew looked almost offended. "Nothing. I was not going to charge you." "I cannot accept that," Katherine protested. "You have already done so much." "Katherine," Matthew said, and the sound of her name on his lips made her heart skip. "I did not come here to collect payment." "Then why did you come?" Katherine asked, hope fluttering in her chest. Matthew turned his hat in his hands, clearly struggling with something. "I have not been able to stop thinking about you," he finally admitted. "These past few days I keep remembering you in my cabin, the way you laughed at my terrible jokes, the way you looked by lamplight." He met her eyes. "I know we barely know each other, and I have got no right to ask this, but would you consider letting me court you properly?" Katherine's breath caught. "You want to court me?" "Yes," Matthew said, "if you are willing. I know my ranch is far from town, and I cannot offer you much, but I would like the chance to see if this, whatever this is between us, could become something more. Joy bloomed in Catherine's chest, warm and bright. I would like that very much, she said. The smile that broke across Matthew's face was like sunrise. Really? Really, Catherine confirmed. I have not been able to stop thinking about you either. Matthew took a step closer, still holding his hat. Can I take you to dinner tonight? There is a restaurant on Main Street, nothing fancy, but the food is good. I would love that, Catherine said. Give me a few minutes to change into something nicer. You look perfect as you are, Matthew said, and the sincerity in his voice made Catherine blush. She invited him inside while she changed, and when she emerged from her bedroom in her best dress, the look in Matthew's eyes made her feel beautiful. He offered her his arm, and they walked together to the restaurant. Dinner was wonderful. They talked about everything and nothing, learning each other's stories, sharing their hopes and dreams. Matthew told her about his plans for the ranch, his voice full of passion and determination. Catherine told him about the women she had helped, the babies she had brought into the world, the satisfaction of her work. You love it, Matthew observed. Being a midwife. I do, Catherine said. It is not always easy, and sometimes it is heartbreaking, but it is meaningful. Every life I help bring into this world, it matters. You would not want to give it up, Matthew said. It was not a question. No, Catherine said honestly. I would not. Is that a problem? Matthew reached across the table and took her hand. No, he said firmly. I would never ask you to give up something that important to you. I am sure we can figure out a way to make it work. Catherine squeezed his hand, relief and affection flooding through her. So many men would have expected her to give up her profession, to focus solely on keeping house and raising children. But Matthew respected her work, valued it even. It made her care for him even more. After dinner, Matthew walked her home, and they stood on her porch in the cold evening air, neither wanting the night to end. Can I see you again soon? Matthew asked. I would be disappointed if you did not, Catherine said. Matthew smiled and after a moment's hesitation, leaned down and pressed a gentle kiss to her cheek. Good night, Catherine. Good night, Matthew, she whispered. Over the following months, Matthew courted Catherine with a determination and tenderness that took her breath away. He came to town every week, sometimes twice a week, when he could spare the time from the ranch. They had dinner together, took walks, attended church socials. Matthew met her friends and neighbors, and Catherine could see the approval in their eyes. He was clearly a good man, hardworking and honest, exactly the kind of man anyone would want for their daughter or friend. But it was the private moments Catherine treasured most. The way Matthew would wait for her when she was called out to a birth, no matter how late it ran. The way he listened when she talked about her day, asking thoughtful questions. The way he looked at her, like she was the most precious thing in the world. In May, Matthew invited Catherine to visit the ranch. She rode Daisy out on a beautiful spring morning, wildflowers blooming across the prairie in splashes of color. Matthew met her at the property line, and the joy on his face at seeing her made Catherine's heart soar. He showed her everything, the barn and the cattle, the small vegetable garden he had started, the creek that ran along the southern edge of his property. Catherine could see the pride he took in his land, the way he had built something from nothing through sheer hard work and determination. They had lunch sitting on the cabin porch, eating sandwiches and watching the cattle graze in the distance. It was peaceful in a way Catherine had never experienced in town, a deep quietness broken only by birdsong and the whisper of wind through the grass. I love it here, Catherine said. I can see why you were drawn to this life. Matthew set down his sandwich and turned to face her. Catherine, there is something I need to tell you. His serious tone made Catherine's stomach flutter nervously. What is it? I am in love with you, Matthew said simply. I think I started falling the moment I found you in that snowstorm, and every day since has only made me more certain. You are smart and brave and compassionate, and you make me want to be a better man. I know we have only been courting a few months, but I cannot imagine my life without you in it. Catherine's eyes filled with tears, happy ones. I love you too, she said. I was afraid to say it first, afraid it was too soon, but Matthew, I love you so much it scares me sometimes. Matthew cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the tears that had spilled over. Do not be scared, he said softly. I will spend the rest of my life proving that you can trust me with your heart. Then he kissed her, and it was nothing like the chaste pecks on the cheek they had shared before. This was deep and passionate, full of promise and longing. Katherine kissed him back, her hands fisting in his shirt, pouring all her love and hope into the contact. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Matthew rested his forehead against hers. Marry me, he said. I know it is fast, and I know there are logistics to work out, but Katherine, I want you to be my wife. I want to spend every day with you, fall asleep beside you every night, wake up to your face every morning. Marry me. Yes, Katherine said, laughing and crying at the same time. Yes, of course I will marry you. Matthew kissed her again, lifting her right off her feet and spinning her around. Katherine laughed, her heart feeling like it might burst from happiness. They were married in August, a simple ceremony in Newton's small church with half the town in attendance. Katherine wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved, and carried wildflowers picked from the prairie. Matthew wore his best suit, his hair slicked back, looking more nervous than she had ever seen him. When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, and Matthew kissed her, the joy on his face mirrored exactly what Katherine felt in her heart. They were cheered and congratulated, fed cake and well wishes, and danced at the reception until Katherine's feet hurt. But the best moment came later that night, when they were finally alone at the ranch. Now Katherine's home too. Matthew carried her over the threshold of the cabin, and they stood together in the lamplight, husband and wife at last. I love you, Katherine Reeves, Matthew said, testing out her new name. I love you, Matthew Reeves, Katherine replied. Their wedding night was tender and passionate, a physical expression of the love they had declared. Matthew was gentle with her, attentive to her needs, and Katherine felt cherished and desired in equal measure. Afterward, they lay wrapped in each other's arms, Katherine's head on Matthew's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Are you happy? Matthew asked, his fingers trailing through her hair. Happier than I ever thought possible, Katherine said honestly. Are you? More than I can put into words, Matthew said. He kissed the top of her head. Thank you for taking a chance on me. Thank you for finding me in that snowstorm, Katherine said, and for not giving up on me, even when I was too stubborn to admit I loved you right away. Matthew chuckled, the sound rumbling through his chest. You were never stubborn. Careful, maybe. Protecting your heart. I understood that. They talked into the night, making plans for their future, dreaming together. Katherine would continue her midwife work, though she would work out of the ranch when possible and stay in town when necessary for difficult births. Matthew would expand the herd, hire help eventually when they could afford it. They would build a life together, brick by brick, day by day. The first year of marriage had its challenges. Blending two lives was not always easy, even when both people loved each other deeply. Katherine struggled sometimes with the isolation of ranch life, missing the constant activity of town. Matthew worried constantly about Katherine traveling for her work, especially in bad weather, haunted by memories of nearly losing her. But they worked through each challenge together, communicating and compromising. Matthew built Katherine a small clinic room onto the cabin where she could see patients and store her supplies. Katherine learned to let Matthew worry without getting defensive, understanding it came from love, not a desire to control her. They learned each other's rhythms, the small habits and quirks that made them individuals. Katherine learned that Matthew was grumpy in the mornings until he had coffee, but sweet and affectionate at night. Matthew learned that Katherine needed time alone to process difficult births, but would come talk to him when she was ready. They learned to fight fair, to apologize quickly, to never go to bed angry. And they learned each other's bodies, the landscape of desire and pleasure. Their physical intimacy deepened as they became more comfortable with each other, and Catherine found joy in the freedom to express her love physically without shame or restraint. In the spring of their second year of marriage, Catherine realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks but wanted to be certain before she told Matthew. When she finally confirmed it, she could barely contain her excitement. She waited until dinner, watching Matthew eat the pot roast she had made, trying to decide the best way to tell him. Finally, she just blurted it out. "I am pregnant." Matthew's fork clattered to his plate. He stared at her, his expression frozen in shock. "What?" "I am pregnant," Catherine repeated, smiling. "We are going to have a baby." For a moment, Matthew just sat there, and then the biggest smile Catherine had ever seen spread across his face. He was out of his chair in an instant, pulling Catherine to her feet and into his arms. "A baby," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "We are having a baby." "Yes," Catherine said, laughing. "In about 6 months by my calculations." Matthew kissed her, deep and loving, and when he pulled back, there were tears in his eyes. "I love you so much," he said. "Both of you." The pregnancy was mostly easy, which Catherine was grateful for given her work. She continued delivering babies well into her 6th month, finally stopping only when she became too ungainly to move quickly if needed. The women of Newton threw her a small celebration, gifting her with tiny clothes and blankets they had made. Matthew became even more protective, constantly worried about Catherine doing too much. She found it endearing and exasperating in equal measure, but she knew it came from a place of deep love. He had already lost so much in his life to the harsh realities of frontier living. He could not bear the thought of losing her or their child. In December, on a cold, clear night, Catherine went into labor. It was strange being on the other side of the experience, feeling the contractions and knowing what was coming. Matthew was a nervous wreck, pacing and fretting until Catherine firmly told him to either help or go tend to the animals. He stayed, holding her hand and wiping her forehead, murmuring encouragement. And when their son finally arrived, squalling and healthy, Matthew cried openly. He held the baby with shaking hands, staring down at the tiny face in absolute wonder. "He is perfect," Matthew whispered. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names for months, but could never quite agree. Looking at Matthew holding their son, his face full of love and awe, Catherine knew exactly what the baby's name should be. "Marcus," she said. "Marcus Reeves." Matthew looked up at her, his eyes bright with tears. "Marcus," he repeated. "I love it." The first months with baby Marcus were exhausting and wonderful. Matthew was an attentive father, getting up for night feedings even though Catherine was nursing, changing diapers without complaint, spending hours just holding his son and watching him sleep. Catherine fell even more in love with her husband seeing him with their child. As Marcus grew from infant to toddler, the ranch grew too. Matthew hired a young ranch hand named James to help with the cattle, giving him more time to spend with his family. Catherine returned to her midwife work part-time, only taking cases in Newton when absolutely necessary, preferring to let women come to her at the ranch when possible. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Hard work and simple pleasures, love and laughter, the satisfaction of building something that would last. Catherine would sometimes think back to that night in the snowstorm, how close she had come to dying, and marvel at how that terrible experience had led to such happiness. When Marcus was 3, Catherine became pregnant again. This time, she gave birth to a daughter they named Kathleen, after Catherine's mother. 2 years later, another son arrived, and they named him Daniel. The cabin became too small for their growing family, so Matthew and James built an addition, adding bedrooms and expanding the kitchen. The ranch prospered. Matthew's herd grew to over 100 head of cattle, and he became known in the area for breeding quality stock. Catherine's reputation as a skilled midwife spread, and women traveled from neighboring towns to have her attend their births. Together, they became pillars of the community. respected, and admired. But more importantly, they were happy, deeply, completely happy in a way that came from choosing each other every single day. They had disagreements, certainly. Raising 3 children and running a ranch provided plenty of opportunities for stress and conflict, but they always came back to their foundation of love and respect, always remembered what they meant to each other. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Matthew surprised Katherine with a picnic out by the creek, the same spot where they had eaten lunch the day he proposed. The children were with friends in town for the day, giving them rare time alone together. They sat on a blanket in the warm August sunshine, eating fried chicken and fresh bread, talking and laughing. Katherine marveled at how comfortable they were with each other, how Matthew still made her heart skip after all these years. "Do you ever regret it?" Matthew asked suddenly. "Marrying me, I mean. Moving out here, away from town." Katherine looked at him in surprise. "Never," she said firmly. "Not for one single second. Why would you ask that?" Matthew shrugged, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "Sometimes I worry that you gave up too much. Your independence, living in town close to your work, the life you had built." Katherine moved closer, taking his face in her hands. "Matthew Reeves, you listen to me. You did not take anything from me. You gave me everything. A home, a family, love beyond anything I imagined possible. Yes, I loved my life before, but I love this life with you infinitely more. You are my best friend, the love of my life, the father of my children. I would not change a single thing." Matthew's expression softened, and he kissed her. "I love you, Katherine, more now than the day we married, which I did not think was possible." "I love you too," Katherine said. "Thank you for asking me to marry you all those years ago. Thank you for being brave enough to take that chance." "Thank you for saying yes," Matthew replied, "and for saving my life just as surely as I saved yours that night." "How did I save your life?" Katherine asked, confused. "Before I found you, I was just existing," Matthew said. "Working the ranch, surviving, but not really living. You brought color and joy and meaning to my life. You saved me from loneliness, from a future of empty years. You gave me everything worth living for." Katherine felt tears prick her eyes. Even after 10 years, Matthew could still move her to tears with his words. "We saved each other then," she said. "Yes," Matthew agreed. "We did." They made love there by the creek, in the warm afternoon sunshine, rediscovering each other with the freedom and passion that came from deep intimacy. Afterward, they lay tangled together on the blanket, talking about their children, their hopes for the future, the little moments that made up their life together. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, they packed up and rode back to the ranch together. Katherine sat in front of Matthew on Duke, now an older but still reliable horse, and leaned back against her husband's chest. She could hear his heartbeat, steady and strong, and felt an overwhelming sense of contentment. This was her life, this man, this ranch, their children, the work she loved. It was everything she had never known she wanted. And it had all started because her wagon broke down in a snowstorm, and a cowboy with dark eyes and gentle hands had refused to let her freeze to death in the Kansas prairie. The years continued to pass, bringing new challenges and joys. Marcus grew into a serious young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. Kathleen developed a fascination with medicine and began studying with Katherine, learning the skills of midwifery. Daniel was the wild one, always getting into trouble but charming his way out of it with a smile that reminded Katherine of Matthew. Katherine and Matthew grew older together, their hair graying, their faces gaining lines, but their love never dimming. They celebrated each anniversary, weathered losses, and celebrated triumphs, supported each other through hard times, and rejoiced together in good ones. When Marcus turned 21, Matthew began teaching him the business side of ranching, preparing to eventually hand over control. Katherine did the same with Kathleen, who at 19 was already skilled enough to attend straightforward births on her own. On a warm evening in May, the whole family gathered on the expanded porch Matthew had built years ago. Marcus and his new wife Sarah sat close together, her pregnancy just beginning to show. Kathleen was home from a visit to a neighboring town, full of stories about a difficult breech birth she had successfully managed. Daniel, now 15, was regaling them with some tale of adventure that was probably half fabrication. Catherine sat in her rocking chair, Matthew beside her, their hands intertwined. She looked around at her family, at the life they had built, and felt profound gratitude. This moment, this simple, perfect moment of being surrounded by the people she loved most in the world, was everything. Matthew squeezed her hand, and when she looked at him, she saw the same contentment reflected in his eyes. They had been married for over 25 years now, and Catherine loved him more with each passing day. He was her partner in every sense of the word, her greatest adventure, her home. "What are you thinking about?" Matthew asked softly, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "How lucky I am," Catherine said. "How that snowstorm was the best thing that ever happened to me." Matthew smiled, the same smile that had captured her heart all those years ago. "It was the luckiest night of my life, too," he said. "Finding you changed everything." "We changed everything?" Catherine corrected. "Together." "Together," Matthew agreed. As the sun set over the Kansas prairie, painting the sky in brilliant shades of gold and crimson, Katherine Reeves sat surrounded by her family and held the hand of the man she loved. Her life had not turned out the way she once expected, but it had turned out better than she ever dreamed. All because of a broken wagon wheel, a deadly snowstorm, and a cowboy who refused to give up when it mattered most. The conversation flowed around her, punctuated by laughter and teasing, the sounds of a family comfortable with each other. Marcus was discussing expanding the herd again, and Matthew was offering advice tempered by decades of experience. Kathleen was showing Sarah some breathing techniques for labor, and Daniel was trying to convince everyone he should be allowed to go on the next cattle drive. Catherine soaked it all in, these precious moments that made up a life. She had brought dozens of children into the world over her years as a midwife, had held the hands of countless laboring women, had witnessed the miracle of birth more times than she could count. But her own children, the family she and Matthew had created together, those were her greatest accomplishments. As darkness fell and the first stars began to appear, the family moved inside. Catherine and Matthew lingered on the porch, neither ready to go in just yet. The night air was cool and sweet with the scent of the wildflowers Catherine had planted around the house. "Do you remember what you said to me that first night?" Catherine asked. "After you found me in the snow?" Matthew thought for a moment. "I said a lot of things that night. You said you had me," Catherine reminded him, "that I should stay with you." "I meant it," Matthew said. "Even then, some part of me knew I did not want to let you go." "You never did," Catherine said softly. "Let me go, I mean. You have held on to me every day since, and I always will," Matthew promised. "For whatever time we have left, I am yours and you are mine." Catherine rested her head on Matthew's shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, leather and wood smoke, and the particular smell that was uniquely Matthew. It was the scent of home, of safety, of love. They sat there in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of the night. An owl hooted in the distance and cattle lowed softly from the pasture. Inside, they could hear their children talking and laughing, the sounds of the home they had built together. "We did good, did we not?" Matthew said. "With our life, with our kids." "We did better than good," Catherine said. "We did wonderful." Matthew kissed the top of her head, a gesture of affection he had repeated thousands of times over the years. Catherine closed her eyes, contentment settling over her like a warm blanket. She had patience to see tomorrow, women counting on her skill and experience. Matthew had cattle to tend, a ranch to run. But right now, in this moment, there was only this, only them, the life they had built, the love that sustained them. The door opened, and Kathleen poked her head out. "Mama, Papa, are you coming in?" Daniel made coffee and actually did not burn it for once. "We will be right there," Katherine said, smiling at her daughter. Kathleen disappeared back inside, and Katherine started to stand, but Matthew pulled her back down for a moment. "Thank you," he said seriously. "For what?" Katherine asked. "For everything," Matthew said. "For saying yes when I asked you to marry me, for building this life with me, for our children, for loving me even when I am difficult, for being my partner and my best friend, for every single day of the past 25 years. Katherine felt tears prick her eyes, moved as always by Matthew's sincerity. "You do not need to thank me for loving you," she said. "It is the easiest thing I have ever done." "Still," Matthew said, "I want you to know I do not take it for granted, not any of it. Every day I wake up next to you is a gift." Katherine kissed him, pouring all her love into it. When they broke apart, she stood and offered him her hand. "Come on, husband. Our family is waiting." Matthew took her hand and let her pull him to his feet. Together, they walked inside, into the warmth and light and love that filled their home. The door closed behind them, shutting out the darkness. Years continued to unfold, bringing grandchildren and great-grandchildren, expansions to the ranch, and new generations of women trained in midwifery by Katherine and Kathleen. The original cabin, where Katherine and Matthew had spent their first years together, was preserved and incorporated into the larger house that now stood on the property. Matthew eventually did hand the ranch over to Marcus, though he remained an active presence, unable to fully retire from the work he loved. Katherine trained 3 more midwives before her hands became too unsteady and her eyes too weak to practice safely. She retired at 68, satisfied that she had passed on her knowledge to capable hands. On their 40th wedding anniversary, the family threw a massive celebration. Children, grandchildren, friends, and neighbors gathered at the ranch to honor Katherine and Matthew. There were speeches and toasts, laughter and tears, stories told about the couple who had built such a remarkable life together. Late in the evening, when the younger grandchildren had been put to bed and the party was winding down, Katherine and Matthew slipped away. They walked down to the creek, to their special spot, moving slowly now, but still hand in hand. The August night was warm and clear, stars blazing overhead in a display that never failed to take Katherine's breath away. They sat on the bank, Matthew's arm around Katherine's shoulders, her head resting against him. 40 years, Matthew marveled. Seems impossible and like no time at all, both at once. "I know what you mean," Katherine said. "I can still remember that night in the snowstorm so clearly, like it happened yesterday. But I also cannot imagine a time when you were not part of my life." "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I had not found you?" Matthew asked. "If I had decided that sound was just the wind? If I had not gone looking?" "No," Katherine said firmly. "Because you did find me. You came looking, and you saved me, and we built this beautiful life together. I do not waste time on what ifs when the reality is so perfect." "It has not been perfect," Matthew said. "We have had our struggles, our disagreements. But we have had each other," Katherine said. "That made everything perfect enough." Matthew tightened his arm around her. "I love you, Katherine Reeves. 40 years later, and I love you more than I did on our wedding day." "I love you too, Matthew," Katherine said. "With everything I am, everything I have been, everything I will be, you are my heart." They sat together in the starlight, 2 people who had found each other against all odds and built a love that had lasted a lifetime. The creek bubbled past, the same as it had 40 years ago when Matthew had proposed, unchanged by time. But Katherine and Matthew had changed, had grown together, had weathered storms, both literal and figurative, and come out stronger for it. When they finally returned to the house, the party had ended, and their family had cleaned up and gone home, or to bed. Katherine and Matthew climbed the stairs to their bedroom, moving slowly but still together. They had shared this room for decades, and Katherine knew every inch of it. the quilt on the bed that she had made with her mother before her parents died, the dresser that had been Matthew's grandmother's, the rocking chair where she had nursed all three of their children. They got ready for bed with the ease of long practice, each knowing the other's routine by heart. When they finally climbed under the covers, they naturally moved together, Catherine's head finding its familiar place on Matthew's shoulder, his arm coming around her. "Good night, my love," Matthew whispered, kissing her forehead. "Good night," Catherine replied. She closed her eyes, listening to Matthew's heartbeat, steady and sure. This was home. Not the house, not the ranch, but this. Matthew's arms around her, his heart beating beneath her ear, his love surrounding her like a shield. Everything else was just details. Catherine drifted off to sleep with a smile on her face, grateful for every single day she had been given with this man, the cowboy who had found her freezing in a snowstorm and had warmed her heart for a lifetime. The final years were gentle ones. Catherine and Matthew grew old together with grace, their bodies slowing but their minds sharp and their love undiminished. They spent their days surrounded by family, watching new generations grow, sharing stories about the old days, content in the life they had built. Matthew passed first, in his sleep at the age of 78, with Catherine holding his hand. His last words were, "I love you," and Catherine carried them in her heart like a talisman. The grief was overwhelming, even though she had known it was coming. Losing Matthew felt like losing half of herself, but she carried on because that was what Matthew would have wanted. She spent time with her children and grandchildren, tended the garden, and sat on the porch watching the sun set over the prairie she had come to love. And every night, she still talked to Matthew, telling him about her day, feeling his presence even though he was gone. Catherine lived for 3 more years after Matthew's death, long enough to see Marcus's son take over the ranch, long enough to witness Kathleen train her own daughter in midwifery, long enough to hold her first great-great-grandchild. When she finally passed, quietly in her sleep at the age of 81, her last thought was of Matthew and the night he had found her in the snowstorm. They buried her next to Matthew on a hill overlooking the ranch with a simple headstone that read, "Katherine and Matthew Reeves. Together in life, together in eternity." Below that, someone had added, "She was a healer. He was her home. They were love." And on winter nights, when the snow fell thick and the wind howled across the Kansas prairie, people said you could sometimes see 2 figures walking together on the ranch, hand in hand, a cowboy and his bride, still finding each other through every storm. Their love had become legend, a story passed down through generations about how a broken wagon wheel and a deadly snowstorm had brought 2 souls together, and how they had built a love that lasted beyond death itself. The ranch still stands, now run by the 6th generation of the Reeves family. The original cabin is maintained as a family shrine, preserved exactly as Catherine and Matthew had left it. Young couples getting married often visit, hoping that some of that legendary love will rub off on them. The story of how Catherine and Matthew met is told and retold, embellished and romanticized, but at its core, the truth remains. A woman's wagon broke down in a snowstorm on a February night in 1882. A cowboy heard her cries and refused to give up until he found her. He saved her life, and in doing so, they found their future together. They fell in love, built a family, and created a legacy that would outlast them both. It was a simple story, really, but it was their story, and it was everything. And in the end, is that not all any of us really want? To be found when we are lost, to be loved when we are alone, to build something that matters with someone who sees us for exactly who we are. Catherine and Matthew had that. They had found each other in the darkness and the cold, and they had spent the rest of their lives grateful for that miraculous night. Their love had been tested by time and hardship, by the demands of frontier life and the challenges of raising a family. But it had never wavered, never diminished. And now, generations later, their story lived on. A reminder that love can be found in the most unexpected places, that one moment can change the course of a life, that two people committed to each other can build something beautiful and lasting. The wind still howls across the Kansas prairie on winter nights, and the snow still falls. But in the warm homes built on land that Katherine and Matthew once walked, families gather and tell stories. They speak of the cowboy and the midwife, of a rescue that became a romance, of a love that conquered everything fate threw at it. And somewhere, perhaps, Katherine and Matthew are still together, still walking hand in hand through whatever comes next, still finding each other through every storm, because some loves are too strong to be bound by something as simple as death. Some loves are eternal. Their story began with a wagon breaking down in a snowstorm, with a woman freezing in the darkness and a cowboy who refused to let her die. But it did not end there. It continued through 42 years of marriage, 3 children, countless grandchildren, laughter and tears, challenges and triumphs. It continued through Matthew's death and Katherine's grief, through the years she carried on without him, through her own peaceful passing. And it continues still, in the memories of their descendants, in the ranch that bears their name, in the legacy of love they left behind, a testament to the power of two people choosing each other, day after day, year after year, until death and beyond. That is the true story of Katherine and Matthew Reeves. Not just how they met, but how they lived. Not just that they fell in love, but that they stayed in love. Not just that they built a life together, but that they built it with intention, with dedication, with unwavering commitment to each other and the vows they made. It is a story worth telling, worth remembering, worth celebrating, because in a world that can be hard and cold and unforgiving, their love was warm and constant and true, and that ultimately is what matters. Not how the story begins, but how it unfolds, how it grows, how it endures. Katherine's wagon broke down in a snowstorm on a bitter February night. Matthew found her freezing and took her home. And from that moment of crisis and rescue grew a love story for the ages, a partnership that lasted a lifetime, a legacy that continues to inspire. They lived, they loved, they built something beautiful together. And when their time came, they left behind more than property or possessions. They left behind proof that true love exists, that it is worth fighting for, that it can survive anything if two people are committed to protecting it. That is their gift to us, the lesson of their lives. Love fiercely. Choose each other daily. Build something that will outlast you. And when storms come, as they inevitably will, hold tight to each other and do not let go. Katherine and Matthew never let go. From that first night when he found her in the snow and promised he had her, to the very end when she held his hand as he passed, they held on. And that made all the difference. Their story is complete now, the circle closed, every thread tied off, from desperate rescue to joyful marriage, from struggling newlyweds to contented elders, from life to death to memory to legend. It is a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. But more importantly, it is a story with meaning. Love saved Katherine's life that night in the snowstorm, but what she and Matthew built together in the decades that followed saved them both in far more important ways. It gave them purpose, partnership, family, legacy. It gave them everything that truly matters in this brief life we are given. And now their story is told, complete and whole, every detail woven together into a tapestry of love that will be passed down through generations. A cowboy and a midwife, two people who should have been strangers, brought together by fate and bound by choice. They lived happily ever after, not in the fairy tale sense of a life without challenges, but in the real sense of two people who found happiness in each other through all of life's ups and downs. They built a life, raised a family, and left the world better than they found it. And when it was time to go, they went knowing they had lived fully, loved completely, and mattered deeply to each other and to all those whose lives they touched. That is how their story ends, not with a question or a cliff edge, but with satisfaction and completion. Katherine Palmer met Matthew Reeves on the worst night of her life, and he became the best thing that ever happened to her. They seized the chance fate gave them and built something extraordinary from it. And now they rest together on that hill overlooking the ranch, their story complete, their love eternal, their legacy secure. Two souls who found each other in the darkness and brought each other into the light, where they lived and loved for all their days. The end, and the happiest of endings at that.